Hello and welcome to Racestreamer, and welcome to part 2 of the Become a Better Driver series of videos that I'm making at the moment, with this one focusing on commercial driving experiences. The first thing that needs to be said about commercial driving experiences versus traditional track days that you take part in your own car is that you don't get anywhere near the same amount of seat time taking part in a driving experience versus if you do a track day in your own car. However, the main pro of doing a commercial driving experience instead of a track day in your car is it's not your car. So if you've got any thoughts or worries about mechanical issues happening, well, it's not your car, so it's not your problem, basically. Now, if you're looking to improve your driving ability through driving experiences, you probably want to look for driving experiences that have the most seat time in one car and those that don't have too many drivers on circuit at one time. So I've done a few driving experiences over the years, and what I'm going to offer is my recommendations on what the best driving experiences are purely from the standpoint of improving your driving ability. So the first experience I ever did was in a Lotus Exige when I was 18 and I'd barely been driving for any time at all. I hadn't even got my own car at this point. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, driving that Lotus round Thruxton race circuit. But it was actually one of the best experiences I've ever done, and that was because I got 12 laps in that car, which gave me a decent amount of time to get used to the car and to gradually work on my speed around the track. And the great part about these driving experiences are as well that you get free tuition as part of your driving experience, whereas if you do a track day, you often have to pay potentially quite a lot of money. We're talking maybe £100 to get tuition on track day. Depends what provider you go with though, mind you. So currently Thruxton circuit offer an experience in a Lotus Exige or a Porsche Cayman where you can drive them for 12 laps around the circuit. And for a lot of drivers, that's going to be a decent amount of seat time and the fact it's on a proper race circuit. So that's a good experience to consider. Another experience that I've taken part in before was driving a Mercedes round Mercedes-Benz World in Brooklands, which is somewhere in Surrey, I think. And what I did is I drove a Mercedes E63 AMG round their various different test tracks and also their skid pan, which was soaked in water, so that way you were able to slide around the skid pan at, I don't know, maybe 10 miles an hour. It wasn't very fast, but the point of that is it gives you time to develop car control, actually driving at quite a slow speed. And also, on the flip side of that, they had some test tracks that you could drive around at a decent pace, and then you could work on your, let's call it real track driving, I suppose. There's also another experience centre where you can get a similar driving experience at Silverstone, and it's run by Porsche. I've gone and driven around there in my own car. On one of the events they opened up the test tracks to the public, but otherwise you can go up there and you can drive one of their fleet of Porsches. So you can drive a Cayman or a 911 or some of the GT cars if that's what you're interested in. And that was a fantastic experience when I went up there and drove my car around it. They were really happy at both Mercedes-Benz World and the Porsche Centre to really let you push the cars to their limits, actually. The only thing that I will mention is that a lot of these driving experiences, they won't let you turn the electronic assists off. Right? So for example, they'll make you keep the traction control on in a lot of circumstances. And that's not great for learning the most about the cars that you're driving or for really stretching the limits of your driving ability and being able to learn how to control a car over the limit. But there was another big plus of the Porsche experience that I received, and that was a bit of classroom time, which sounds really boring on the surface, but I have to be honest, it was super detailed. It went into a lot of the approach, like the mental approach that you would take when you go about driving fast. So it was good to think through that side of things, and it made you approach performance driving in a more calculated manner. I have to say though, the best experience that I've ever done as a commercial driving experience was driving a slightly modified GT86 round Brands Hatch as part of their rally experience. And the reason why it was the best experience I've ever done was because there is no anti-lock brakes in that car, there was no traction control, there was a hydraulic handbrake, and the whole experience was based around driving the car, so I guess over the limit. So you were able to slide it around corners, pull the handbrake to initiate, oversteer, and it was a fantastic experience for learning the most about car control that I ever have. And I actually enjoyed it so much I went back and did it again after my first experience there. And in this footage, as you can probably see, it's a little bit slippery when it rains on this particular circuit, and they're completely happy for you to spin the car because it's just part of your learning. Making mistakes is part of your learning. So I'm really glad that I did that experience at Brands Hatch a couple of times, purely from the point of view that the instructors were happy to let you make mistakes and then help you avoid making the same mistakes in the future. So the final experience that I've done more recently is when I went up to the Lotus test tracks in Hethel, which is near Snetterton, which is near Norwich, roughly. And I have to say that I definitely got the best tuition that I've ever received on a driving experience when I went up to Lotus. And that's because they have a really high caliber plethora of instructors there. So my instructors when I went up and drove a Lotus Elise and an Exige 350 Sport around the circuit, I had Rob Bath sitting next to me in the Elise, which I drove for about 20 minutes, and then I moved on to the Exige and I had Martin Donnelly as my instructor, and they were really helpful when it came to giving me tips, not just about my driving and how to get the most out of the car, but how to get the most out of the conditions on circuit that day, which I think it's fair to say were pretty greasy when I went up there, as it had rained heavily the night before and then it started to dry up as I drove around the circuit at the time of the experience. So as you can see, I've borrowed a bit of footage from Pistonheads where they went and test drove the Exige round the test track, and you can see there's a lot of different challenges in the circuit, and obviously he was able to drive the car fast, and that's roughly how I felt while I was driving the Exige on the day I went as well. So between those, you've got some really fantastic commercial driving experiences that you can take part in there. All of those cost upwards of £150, so you're talking about the same kind of money that you could pay to take part in a track day on a circuit. So you could argue that it's quite expensive for what it is, but then you can argue if you don't have to worry about the upkeep of your car, maybe it balances out, I don't know, maybe not so expensive. On a final side note, however, the cheapest way to actually go about practicing performance driving is still to go to your local kart circuit and take part in karting practice sessions, because they are always going to be much cheaper than any commercial driving experiences that are out there. And it's the most focused and core way of developing your driving ability, especially if you turn up on a wet day and drive the kart round on slick tyres, because then you really learn a lot about kart control, because you are just not on the right tyres for the conditions, so you have to learn to adapt or just spin around everywhere. So that's it for this video. Come back for part 3 eventually, which is going to cover how to develop performance driving techniques on the road.